I'm Samantha Granger, and at 30, I inherited my grandfather's estate. It sounds like a dream, right? But trust me, it's anything but. My phone buzzes nonstop, a steady rhythm of messages from people I haven't heard from in years. My family, well, most of them, hasn't exactly been thrilled about the inheritance. I suppose that's what happens when the will doesn't go the way they expect. Before I can continue my story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. My family has always had this perfect image, at least from the outside. Wealthy, successful, the kind of family you'd see in magazines. But underneath all that, a lot of secrets and dysfunction. Behind the designer clothes, the spotless houses, and the polished smiles, we were falling apart. Nobody knew that better than I did. But the estate, it changed everything. My grandfather, Thomas Granger, was a self-made man. He built everything with grit, determination, and a refusal to cut corners. He was my hero. The man I looked up to, learned from. But his passing meant more than just saying goodbye to someone I loved. It meant a family fight that would leave me reeling. I didn't expect it to come from my own mother. Growing up in the Granger family, I was used to perfection being the expectation. Every meal was immaculate, every gathering staged like a glossy magazine spread. We had it all: the country house, the expensive cars, the vacations to places I couldn't even pronounce. But behind that glossy picture, things weren't as flawless as they seemed. Carolyn, my mother, had a way of making everything look perfect on the outside. She was always perfectly put together, designer clothes, manicured nails, her laugh too polished to ever sound genuine. But I saw the cracks. Even as a little girl, I knew something was wrong. She never made the effort to truly listen, to be present, unless it made her look good. It was as though her life was a performance, and I was an extra in a show I didn't audition for. Grandpa saw through it, though. He always made a point of telling me that family wasn't about appearances. It was about the foundation you built with hard work, loyalty, and integrity. But with Carolyn, that foundation was long gone. The worst part, she pretended it didn't matter. She pretended we were this picture-perfect family, never acknowledging the years of hidden debts and mismanagement that were slowly choking us. That facade was what I was up against now. My mother's perfect world was crumbling, and she wanted me to help put the pieces back together. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't about to be her pawn. Not anymore. And so when I got that call, the one that would change everything, I knew things were about to get real messy. My mother was about to make her move. The inheritance wasn't just a fortune. It was the trigger for a storm that had been brewing under our roof for decades. When I think about Thomas Granger, my grandfather, I think about strength, clarity, and unwavering values. He wasn't just the founder of a real estate empire. He was a man of integrity. People say it's hard to leave a legacy, but he did it with ease. He wasn't the richest man in the room, nor the flashiest, but he was always the one people turned to when they needed sound advice. For as long as I can remember, he made sure I understood the value of hard work and loyalty. He didn't teach me from books or seminars. He taught me by including me in his day-to-day decisions. I'd sit beside him in his study, watching as he pored over contracts, calculated margins, and made decisions that would change the course of his business. I was 11 the first time he took me to one of his properties. The foundation is what makes the house stand, he told me. Everything else is just decoration. But what meant the most to me wasn't the business lessons. It was the quiet, unexpected moments when he would turn to me and say, "You've got a good head for this, Samantha. You've got the right heart, too." I took those words to heart. Grandpa believed in me in a way that no one else did. And as much as I loved him, I knew what it meant when he put me in charge of his estate. It wasn't just about the business. It was about protecting his legacy, upholding his values, and carrying that weight. But it was also about keeping my family's dysfunction in check. I knew what Carolyn was like, how she'd squander every penny if given the chance. That was never going to happen on my watch. When Grandpa passed away, I didn't just lose my mentor and my role model. I lost the person who kept me grounded in this toxic family. Now his estate was mine, but so were the battles. Little did I know, Carolyn was already circling, waiting for the right moment to strike. I'd been in a fog for days after Grandpa's funeral, numb to everything around me, barely functioning. The house felt like a mausoleum, every corner reminding me of him. The day after his funeral, Carolyn showed up unannounced, her usual perfection on display, though I could see the tension in her shoulders. I should have known something was coming. Carolyn didn't do subtle. She did demands, manipulations, and guilt trips. I opened the door, not fully prepared for what was about to unfold. Her heels clicked sharply on the marble floors as she entered. "Samantha, we need to talk." Her voice was as calm and calculated as ever, but I could see the urgency in her eyes. She wasn't here to grieve. She was here to claim what she thought was hers. "Mom, I'm still processing everything." "It's been less than 24 hours, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She waved me off, clearly not interested in my grief. "I'm sure you are, but you need to understand something, Samantha." She paused, letting the words hang between us like a spider spinning her web. "This estate, this business, it's not just for you, it's for the family. For us. You'll have your share, of course. But you need to relinquish control to me, Samantha. I'm your mother. I have more experience. It's time you let go and let the family come together. This was always meant to be a family enterprise." The audacity of it made my blood boil, but I couldn't let her see it. Instead, I forced a smile, trying to mask my shock. "You think Grandpa wanted you to have it all after everything he knew about your spending?" She flinched, but quickly regained her composure. "You don't understand. We have a legacy to protect. The business is far too important for you to handle alone. Trust me, I'm doing this for you, for all of us." It hit me then. Carolyn wasn't just grieving the loss of her father. She was grieving the loss of her access to his money, his power, and his control. And she wasn't going to let go without a fight. Her words stung, but I was prepared. I had already made up my mind. This wasn't going to be like everything else in my life, where I gave in to her whims to avoid conflict. Not this time. I was going to stand my ground. "I'm not giving up control, Mom. I'm going to honor Grandpa's wishes. I'll make sure the estate and the business stay true to what he built," I said, my voice firm. "If you want to contest the will, go ahead, but don't expect me to fold." She didn't like that answer, not one bit. But as she stormed out of my house, I felt a sense of power I hadn't known in years. I had taken the first step, and there was no going back. But I knew this was just the beginning. The next few days felt like a blur. I spent every waking hour sifting through Grandpa's old office, his personal files, his desk, looking for any clue that might back up my decision to stand my ground. I had no illusions about what Carolyn might do next. She wasn't going to back down just because I'd said no once. She'd already started sending her friends to call me, pressuring me in the guise of family concern, trying to make me feel like I was ruining everything. But I knew better. I couldn't prove what I knew to be true. Her history of irresponsible spending, her repeated loans from Grandpa, the way she always managed to find a way to have just enough credit to buy herself a new wardrobe while the bills piled up until now. I started going through the old leather-bound journals Grandpa had kept. As I flipped through the pages, each one meticulously dated, a sense of clarity began to take shape. Grandpa had kept records of every loan he gave to Carolyn, how she begged for money, how he reluctantly handed it over, with promises that this time she would make things right. I hadn't noticed before, but there it was, all written out in black and white, $50 Sausners for Carolyn's car payment. $25,000 for a trip to Paris this time, no loan repayment expected. It was stunning. Grandpa had trusted her, but he'd also documented every single time he had to step in. He'd left a trail, a quiet record of his frustration, his disappointment. And then I found it, a letter he had written to me, dated just 6 months ago. My heart sank as I read the words. Grandpa knew this fight was coming. He'd been preparing me for it, even though I hadn't realized it at the time. "Dearest Samantha, I trust you will understand the weight of what's coming. I have made my decision with a clear mind, and I know you will honor it, as I have always trusted you to do. The legacy of this estate is more than just the land or the buildings. It's about the principles that built it. You must stand firm in the face of pressure, no matter who it comes from. You are the only one I trust to carry this forward." I let the letter fall from my hands, stunned by the weight of his foresight. My grandfather had seen the storm brewing. He'd prepared me for this. His words, his trust, they made me feel less alone in this fight. But now I had to gather the evidence. I couldn't do this just on principle alone. I knew Carolyn wasn't going to back down without a fight. She'd go for anything, any weakness she could exploit. So I started gathering everything, the journal entries, the loans, the letter, and the records of my mother's purchases, luxury items bought with money Grandpa had intended to keep her afloat for emergencies. It was all there, and now I had the proof I needed. When I finally looked over the mountain of evidence in front of me, I felt a strange calm. It was more than just legal documents. It was the undeniable truth, and it was mine. I could feel the tension building, knowing that soon I would have to face Carolyn again. But this time, I wasn't going in empty-handed. The day of the family meeting arrived faster than I expected. My phone had been blowing up messages from Carolyn, from family friends, and even distant relatives. Everyone seemed to have an opinion on what I should do, as if I were the villain in their story. But that was nothing compared to the pressure I felt walking into my grandfather's study, now my study, to face my mother, my siblings, and the legal team she'd brought along. The house felt colder than usual that day, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I stood in the doorway trying to steady myself, but the moment I stepped inside, I was hit with the weight of expectation. Carolyn was sitting at the head of the long wooden table, her posture immaculate, as always, hands clasped neatly in front of her. Beside her were two men in expensive suits, their faces unreadable. I recognized one of them, Harold Wilson, the family lawyer, who had been with us for years. He'd always been amiable, but today he looked more like a hired gun than a trusted advisor. David and Rebecca were seated at the table, their expressions tight, as if they already knew what was coming. I felt my pulse quicken as I slid into the chair across from Carolyn. She didn't waste time. "Samantha, we're here today to resolve the issue of the estate," she said, her voice deceptively calm, though I could hear the underlying anger. "You've had your time to grieve. Now it's time to be practical. This is about family unity, about preserving what your grandfather built." I took a breath and laid my portfolio on the table, the weight of it making a small thud that seemed louder than it should have been. "This isn't about family unity, Mom. It's about control. You've spent your whole life trying to control everything, and now you want to control Grandpa's legacy. But I'm not going to let you." She stared at me, a flicker of shock crossing her face before she masked it with a smile. "You don't understand, Samantha. This estate isn't just yours. It's for all of us. We're family." Her words cut deep, but I had to keep going. "No," Grandpa made it clear. "He trusted me, not you, to carry this on. And I'm not going to let you manipulate me or him anymore." She shot a glance at Harold Wilson, who seemed to nod slightly, almost imperceptibly. I knew this was where the real fight would begin. Mr. Wilson's voice interrupted the rising tension. "Samantha, your mother and the rest of the family are simply concerned. This is a large estate, and it will require someone with more experience to manage it properly." "Your mother's experience." "Experience!" I interrupted, voice rising. "What experience managing debt? Mismanaging your finances for years? Do you even hear yourself?" Carolyn's eyes flashed with fury, but she quickly regained control. She leaned forward slightly, the air thick with her anger. "This estate belongs to the Granger family, to all of us, not just you. We'll all share in it, but you need to let go of control." I could see David squirming uncomfortably in his seat, but it was Rebecca who finally spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. "Mom, I don't think this is right." I turned to her, a sense of disbelief washing over me. "What do you mean?" She looked at Carolyn and then back at me, the guilt in her eyes undeniable. "I've been thinking about what you've said, about Grandpa, and I get it now. I don't want to be a part of this fight anymore." David shifted in his chair, and for a moment, I thought he was about to say something, but instead, he just stared at the table. Harold Wilson adjusted his glasses, clearing his throat. "What are you suggesting, Rebecca?" Rebecca hesitated. "I don't think Mom should get control. Not if she's going to keep treating this like it's just hers to take." It felt like a punch to the gut, but in the best possible way. My sister was finally seeing the truth, and it gave me the strength to face Carolyn head-on. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about exposing the lies and taking a stand for what was right. I pushed the portfolio toward the center of the table, where it landed with a decisive thud. "I've got evidence. Proof of every manipulation. Every lie. And I'm not afraid to use it. So if you want to fight this, bring it. But know this, there's no going back. The silence in the room was deafening. The silence that followed felt like it stretched for miles. My heart pounded a steady beat that threatened to drown out everything else. I looked at David, expecting him to defend Carolyn, to side with her like he always had. But this time, something was different. His gaze was fixed on the table, his hands fidgeting in his lap, his jaw clenched tight. For a moment, I thought he might break under the pressure. The tension was palpable, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for him to make the call. But then, in a move that stunned everyone in the room, David stood up. "I don't!" He started, his voice unsteady, but he quickly cleared his throat. "I don't want to be part of this anymore." Carolyn's head snapped toward him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What are you talking about, David? You can't just turn your back on your family." David's voice was quieter now, but firm. "No, Mom. I've been thinking about it for a while, and I can't ignore it anymore. You've always put your own interests first, and I can't keep pretending that's okay. I'm not going to fight for something I don't believe in." I blinked in disbelief, not fully processing what he was saying. David had always been the one who would follow Carolyn, no questions asked. He was the one who'd stay in the background, avoid rocking the boat, and let Carolyn handle everything. But now he was speaking up. Now he was standing with me. "You can't," Carolyn's voice cracked, but she was struggling to maintain control. "You're making a mistake, David. You're going to ruin everything. I'm your mother. You owe me. You owe the family." "I don't owe anyone anything," David said, his voice gaining strength with every word. "Not when it means betraying everything I know is right." The weight of his words hung in the air. He wasn't just speaking to Carolyn, he was speaking to all of us. The truth was coming out whether we were ready for it or not. Carolyn's face turned bright red, her frustration reaching a boiling point. She opened her mouth to argue, to guilt-trip him into changing his mind, but she stopped herself. I could see it in her eyes. She was realizing slowly that she couldn't control him anymore. Not like she used to. And that was when it hit me. This wasn't just a fight for money or control of the estate anymore. It was a fight for David's freedom, for him to break away from the shackles of Carolyn's influence, to finally make his own choices. I didn't know if he was ready to fully understand it yet, but I was beginning to see a shift in him, one I never thought I'd see. The silence stretched on until David broke it with a soft sigh. "I'm with you, Sam. I don't know exactly what that means, but I'm not going to keep pretending anymore." My heart swelled with something close to relief mixed with pride. Maybe, just maybe, we had a chance to heal this family. But I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Carolyn was still my mother, and no matter what, she was going to keep fighting. But for the first time in years, I wasn't facing her alone. I had David by my side. It was a small victory, but in a battle like this, even the smallest victories meant the world. The silence that had filled the room after David's declaration was still heavy, but it felt different now, less suffocating, more open. I looked over at Rebecca, who had been quiet for most of the meeting, and found her eyes fixed on her hands in her lap. Her fingers were nervously twisting a strand of her hair, but there was something else there now, an unmistakable flicker of doubt. Carolyn was still fuming, her face flushed with anger and disbelief. But as she turned to face Rebecca, there was a momentary shift. It was as if Carolyn knew that she was losing her grip on this situation, and Rebecca was slipping away from her. The desperation was clear in her eyes. "Rebecca," Carolyn said, her voice shaking slightly. Don't let Samantha make you believe lies. You've seen what she's capable of. You know how hard I've worked to keep this family together. How many times have I had to sacrifice for you all, and now this. You're going to side with her." Rebecca raised her head, and for the first time in the entire meeting, she met Carolyn's gaze. There was no fear in her eyes, just resolve. It almost felt like a quiet, unspoken declaration. She wasn't afraid of Carolyn anymore. "I'm sorry, Mom," Rebecca said, her voice low but steady. "I've been listening to you for so long, but I've seen the way things really are. I know what you've been doing, the lies you've told to keep control. I know now that I can't keep pretending anymore." Carolyn's face contorted in pain, but she quickly masked it with anger. "You don't know what you're saying. You'll regret this." But Rebecca didn't falter. She didn't back down. "Maybe. But I can't keep turning a blind eye. I can't keep enabling you. I've been angry for so long at Sam at the world, but you've been the one pulling the strings all along, and I don't want to be part of it anymore." I held my breath as I watched Carolyn's reaction. For a moment, Carolyn just stared at Rebecca, her lips trembling as if she were trying to find the right words. But none came. There was nothing she could say. Rebecca stood up, her posture more confident than I had ever seen it before. "I need time, Mom. I need to figure out who I am without this constant pressure. I need to find my own way." The room seemed to shrink, the weight of her words hanging in the air long after she spoke them. It wasn't a dramatic moment of defiance. It was quiet, almost resigned. But in that moment, it was everything. For the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't fighting this alone. My sister, my brother, we were together in this, even if we hadn't fully figured it out yet. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about reclaiming our identities, our lives, and standing up for something real. Rebecca Carolyn finally said, her voice small, almost desperate. "You don't know what you're doing." "I do," Rebecca replied, her voice firm. "I do know. I've been listening to the wrong things for so long, and now I'm listening to myself." With that, she turned and walked out of the room, her steps echoing through the house, leaving Carolyn and the rest of us in stunned silence. The air felt lighter now, though it was heavy with what had just happened. I could still hear Carolyn muttering under her breath. But the truth was, it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that Rebecca was finally seeing the light. She was no longer a pawn in Carolyn's game. She was free. And though the path to healing would be slow, this was a start. David had made his choice. Rebecca had made hers. And now it was my turn to make sure that my grandfather's legacy was honored the way he would have wanted it. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But for the first time, I felt like I could see the end of the tunnel. The family meeting had turned into a battlefield, with emotions and loyalties clashing. As the minutes dragged on, I could feel the pressure building in my chest. I wasn't just fighting for my grandfather's estate anymore. I was fighting for my own sense of self-worth, for the values I'd inherited from a man who had always taught me to stand firm in the face of adversity. This wasn't just a legal fight. It was a moral one. Carolyn had withdrawn into a cold silence after Rebecca left, but she hadn't given up. She never did. Her pride, the one thing I could always count on her having in spades, wouldn't allow her to just let go. But I wasn't backing down either. Not now. The lawyers, Harold Wilson and Lori Daniels, were sitting quietly at the table, waiting for the next move. I could see it in their eyes. They were waiting for Carolyn's signal, ready to jump in with whatever legal tactic they'd rehearsed. But I had prepared for this. I knew what was coming, and I was ready. "Let's cut the theatrics, Carolyn," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "You can't control this anymore. Grandpa left everything to me, and that's because he trusted me. Not you, not anyone else. He made his choice." Harold Wilson cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. "Samantha, I think you're misunderstanding." "No," I interrupted, my eyes never leaving Carolyn. "I'm not misunderstanding anything. The will is clear. Grandpa was lucid when he wrote it. He didn't want you to have control because he knew what you'd do with it." The words hit Carolyn like a slap. She flinched, but her mask stayed in place, her icy composure holding. "How dare you?" she spat, her voice low and dangerous. "You've always been a disappointment, Samantha. A little girl who thinks she knows better than her own mother. I should have known you'd ruin everything." I felt the sting of her words, but I refused to let them break me. Not now. I had to be stronger than I'd ever been in my life. My grandfather had prepared me for this even when I hadn't realized it. This wasn't just about fighting for the estate. It was about standing up for the values that had been passed down to me, values Carolyn had ignored her whole life. "I'm not ruining anything, Mom. I'm doing exactly what Grandpa wanted," I said, pushing forward. "You can keep fighting. You can try to tear this family apart. But in the end, you'll be the one who loses. You've already lost the respect of your children, and soon you'll lose everything else." The words hung in the air. Carolyn's face twisted in fury, her hands gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white. But there was a crack in her armor. I could see it. For the first time, she wasn't in control, and that terrified her. "This isn't over," Carolyn hissed, standing up abruptly, knocking her chair back. "You'll regret this. I swear you will." I stood as well, the weight of the moment settling in. "No, Mom. This is over. For you, I'm done, and I'm not backing down. As Carolyn stormed out of the room, I turned to Harold and Lori. I have all the evidence I need. The journal, the loans, the letter from Grandpa. If you try to contest the will, you'll lose. And if you want to make this messy, I'll be ready. Harold shifted uncomfortably in his seat, looking at Lori for guidance. But he knew. He knew this wasn't a battle he could win. He gave a reluctant nod, closing his briefcase with a soft click. Lori followed suit, standing and nodding toward me. We'll handle the legal proceedings from here. If your mother decides to pursue this, we'll have all the documentation in place. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. The fight was far from over, but for the first time I felt like I had the upper hand. I walked out of the room, my mind racing with everything that had happened. David and Rebecca had both made their choices, and now it was up to me to honor Grandpa's legacy, not just for the business, but for the family, fractured though it was. But as I passed through the hallway, I felt a shift. The weight of the past few days, the battles, the guilt, it all seemed to lighten. This wasn't about winning some inheritance. This was about standing up for the man who had taught me what really mattered in life. It was about honor, integrity, and doing the right thing no matter what the cost. I had won today, but the real fight was still ahead of me. It was a fight to rebuild not just the business, but my relationship with my family. It wasn't going to be easy. But if I had learned anything from Grandpa, it was that the hardest battles were the ones worth fighting. The days after the confrontation were both a relief and a challenge. With Carolyn storming off, the immediate pressure seemed to lift. But I knew better than to think it was truly over. She wasn't the type to go quietly into the night. She'd be back, and she'd be looking for ways to undermine me. I had no illusions about that. Still, I pushed forward. The legal battles loomed, but I was prepared. More importantly, I had something Carolyn didn't have: my grandfather's legacy and the values that came with it. I wasn't just managing an estate, I was shaping a future, one grounded in everything Grandpa had taught me. As I spent more time with the business, I began to see where the cracks had formed under Grandpa's watchful eye. There were gaps in the leadership, minor decisions that hadn't been followed through properly, and a disconnect between the vision he'd built and what had been allowed to slip in his absence. It was a mess, but it was a manageable mess, and one I was prepared to tackle head-on. The first step was implementing some structural changes, nothing drastic, but enough to bring back the rigor Grandpa had put in place. I restructured departments, brought in new talent, and started focusing on sustainable development, just like Grandpa had always dreamed about. One afternoon, as I was meeting with our head of marketing, I noticed a change in the atmosphere. David had been coming by the office more often, hesitant at first, but gradually more comfortable. One day, he sat across from me at the conference table, an unusual seriousness in his expression. "You're doing it, aren't you?" he asked quietly. I raised an eyebrow, confused. "Doing what?" "Making it happen. I can see it. The changes. Grandpa would have been proud." The words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't about the business, it was about reclaiming a piece of what had been lost. David wasn't just acknowledging the work I was putting in. He was seeing the way I was rebuilding something that had always been broken. And for the first time, I felt like we were on the same page. We weren't the perfect family, and we likely never would be. But at least now there was a path forward, a way to rebuild trust, to redefine what mattered, and to heal some of the wounds that had festered for years. Rebecca, too, reached out. Our first conversation after the meeting had been awkward, each of us unsure how to navigate the space between us. But over time, it became clearer. She wasn't just apologizing for what she had done. She was acknowledging her own growth. "I don't want to fight anymore," she said one evening, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "Not with you, not with anyone." It felt like a delicate truce, fragile yet powerful. We didn't talk much about the past. Instead, we began focusing on the future. The family business was a way to rebuild, yes, but it was also a way for us to create something together. We weren't going to fix everything overnight. That was clear. But we were starting to understand each other in ways we never had before. As for Carolyn, the legal battle dragged on longer than I expected. But ultimately, it became clear that she didn't have the evidence to overturn Grandpa's will. She tried to twist the narrative to make it seem like I'd manipulated him, but the documentation was too clear, the proof too strong. I didn't win by fighting dirty. I won by standing firm in the truth, and that was enough. Months later, I stood in front of a new company, one that was growing, expanding, and thriving in ways it hadn't in years. It was my grandfather's legacy, yes, but it was also my own. I had taken his lessons, his work ethic, and his belief in doing the right thing, and I'd made something out of it. Something bigger than all of us. And while things weren't perfect, I finally felt like I had something solid. A foundation, a future. A week later, Ethan asked me a question I wasn't expecting. "Samantha," he said, his voice casual but knowing, "have you ever thought about what comes next?" I didn't need to think about it long. The business, my family, everything we had been through it, had already shaped my answer. I think what comes next is just more of this. More building, more creating, more healing. He smiled as if he knew exactly what I meant. And maybe, just maybe, I did too. It wasn't about the money or the estate anymore. It was about the people, the ones I loved, the ones I had lost, and the ones I was learning to trust again. That was the real legacy. Not the buildings, not the business deals. It was the understanding that in the end, it's the people who matter most. I had learned that the hard way, but it was a lesson I'd carry with me forever. Families can break us in ways no one else can, but sometimes they also give us the strength to rebuild on our terms. My journey wasn't about an inheritance. It was about choosing values over approval, truth over tradition, and legacy over loyalty to dysfunction. Standing firm cost me relationships, illusions, and comfort. But what I gained was clarity, peace, and purpose. I learned that sometimes you have to be the one to break the cycle, so the next generation doesn't have to. Have you ever had to choose between what's right and what's expected? Between your peace and someone else's approval? I'd love to hear your story. Leave a comment below, even if it's just one line. You're not alone. If this story resonated, like the video, subscribe for more, and share it with someone who needs courage today. Thank you for listening, and remember, you're allowed to protect your peace, even if it makes others uncomfortable. Take care of yourself. You matter.